When we think about superpowers, we often imagine mighty armies, endless resources, towering empires that seem too great to ever fall. Throughout history, the greatest civilizations have risen with pride and fallen with shame. Yet few stories are as shocking, inspiring, and humbling as how Islam, from its very humble beginnings, defeated the superpowers of its time. In the 7th century, two colossal empires ruled much of the known world: the Byzantine Empire in the west and the Persian Empire in the east. They were sophisticated, wealthy, and seemingly invincible. Against them stood a group of believers, born out of the deserts of Arabia, few in number, lacking resources, barely known beyond their own tribes. And yet, against all odds, they rose, not just to challenge these empires, but to overcome them in ways that stunned the world. This was not a victory of weapons alone, nor was it the result of chance. It was a victory driven by something far deeper, something the mighty had forgotten and the humble remembered. The early Muslims carried with them a belief so strong that it transformed individuals into legends, a discipline so profound that it turned small forces into unstoppable movements, and a unity so rare that it turned scattered tribes into a world-changing civilization. They fought not for land, not for gold, but for something far greater. They fought for truth, for justice, for the right to live and worship without fear. Imagine the scene: Muslim armies facing soldiers whose armor gleamed under the sun, whose military traditions stretched back centuries, who had the backing of entire civilizations. And yet, the Muslims, carrying little more than their faith, defeated them again and again. The superpowers of the world, with all their might, fell before people who chose humility over arrogance, sacrifice over comfort, truth over propaganda. This was not the story the world expected to see. It was a reminder written across history that strength does not always come from what you can hold in your hand. True strength comes from what you hold in your heart. The leadership of Prophet Muhammad PBUH and those who followed him taught the early Muslims that success was not about domination, but about standing for something greater than themselves. They did not merely conquer territories, they conquered hearts. They did not just change political maps, they changed the course of human history. Their victories were not just over armies, but over corruption, injustice, and oppression. Today, as we look around and see new empires rising and falling, as we witness the pride and arrogance of those who think they can never be touched, the story of how Islam defeated the superpowers serves as a powerful reminder. History is not kind to those who forget the truth. Power built on injustice is a house of cards. It may look tall, but it can fall with a single blow. The early Muslims knew this. They knew that real power comes from faith, discipline, and an unbreakable connection to something eternal. Stay with me, because as we dive deeper into this story, you will see details that will shake you. You will realize that what happened back then is not just history, it is a living lesson for us today. The truth about how Islam defeated the superpowers will shock you, not because it is mysterious or magical, but because it is real, undeniable, and deeply human. And once you understand it, you may never look at the world the same way again. The early Islamic victories over the Byzantine and Persian empires are among the most astonishing events in world history. These were not small regional battles fought between neighboring tribes. These were monumental clashes between a new, rising faith and two of the most established superpowers the world had ever seen. The Byzantine Empire, with its deep roots in Roman traditions, was a titan of the West, while the Persian Sassanid Empire, with its rich culture and sophisticated systems, dominated the East. Both had massive armies, complex political structures, and centuries of experience. Yet, within just a few decades of Prophet Muhammad's passing, both empires found themselves defeated, not by a larger or wealthier enemy, but by a relatively small group of believers who carried an unshakable conviction in their hearts. The Battle of Yarmouk, against the Byzantines and the Battle of Qadisiyyah against the Persians stand as prime examples of how faith triumphed over material power. In both battles, Muslim forces were vastly outnumbered. The Byzantines and Persians had better equipment, larger armies, and deeper logistical support. From a worldly perspective, victory for the Muslims seemed impossible. However, the Muslims were driven by something that no amount of wealth or strategy could replace. They believed without doubt that they were fighting for a cause greater than themselves, a cause that connected them to something beyond this temporary world. They had discipline that came from deep belief. They followed a leadership that valued justice over pride, mercy over cruelty, and truth over political games. Their commanders, like Khalid ibn al-Walid and Sa ibn Abi Waqqas, did not seek personal glory, but sought only to fulfill their trust with sincerity. When they stepped onto the battlefield, they were not just warriors, they were carriers of a divine message, standing against systems that had grown corrupt, oppressive, and detached from the real needs of the people. The collapse of these empires after their defeats was not merely political. It was spiritual. The people under their rule had grown tired of injustice, heavy taxation, and elitism. When they saw the justice and simplicity of Islam, many embraced it willingly. What defeated the superpowers was not just the sword. It was the message of Islam, the character of its followers, and the fulfillment of a deep human yearning for truth and fairness. The empires fell because they had hollowed themselves out from the inside, and Islam filled the vacuum with purpose, dignity, and hope. The role of unwavering faith and discipline among the Muslim armies cannot be overstated when we talk about how Islam defeated the superpowers. These early Muslims were not just fighters, they were individuals whose hearts were anchored by an unbreakable connection to their Creator, and whose minds were trained with discipline that many larger armies lacked. Their strength did not come from numbers or advanced technology. It came from their belief that success or failure was determined by their sincerity, their patience, and their commitment to the cause of truth. Each soldier did not see himself as just a warrior, but as a servant of a higher purpose, someone carrying a sacred trust to establish justice and to defend the rights of the oppressed. Their discipline on the battlefield was something that even seasoned generals from the Byzantine and Persian sides marveled at. Muslim forces would organize themselves with incredible order, maintain unity even under extreme pressure, and display an unmatched level of courage. They were taught that their true enemy was not just the one standing opposite them with a sword, but arrogance, fear, and despair. As long as they stayed connected to their faith and remained disciplined, they believed they could never truly be defeated. This mental and spiritual preparation made them nearly impossible to break. Even when facing terrifying odds, they stayed firm. Hunger, thirst, wounds, none of it shook their resolve, because their hearts were full of something that physical hardship could not touch. Before battles, they prayed not for victory alone, but for the acceptance of their efforts. They saw victory as a gift and defeat as a test, but neither changed their loyalty to the cause. This mindset made them unstoppable. The world had seen disciplined armies before, but what made the Muslim armies unique was the combination of discipline with deep faith. They were not mercenaries fighting for wealth. They were believers fighting for a vision of a better, more just world. Their commanders led by example, showing humility, wisdom, and patience. They would sleep among their men, eat simple food, and remind everyone that the real power did not lie in strategy or swords, but in the sincerity of their mission. When armies are bound together by faith and held in discipline by higher ideals, they do not merely fight battles, they change history. And that is exactly what the early Muslims did as they faced and overcame the superpowers of their time. The leadership qualities of Prophet Muhammad PBUH and the rightly guided caliphs were the backbone of Islam's early victories over the superpowers. It was not just their strategies or commands that led to success. It was their character, their vision, and their deep understanding of human nature that elevated the Muslim community into a force the world had never seen. Prophet Muhammad PBUH laid the foundation by teaching values that built strong individuals: humility, courage, honesty, patience, and trust in a higher purpose. He showed through his life how a leader must serve his people, listen to their concerns, and never abuse power. His leadership was not about domination, but about lifting others to their best potential. When battles came, the believers fought with a spirit that reflected the teachings of someone who had prepared them not just for war, but for life itself. After the Prophet's passing, the leadership of the rightly guided caliphs continued this legacy with remarkable wisdom. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali were not men who sought personal power. They carried the heavy burden of leadership with humility and fear of accountability. Their decisions were based on justice, consultation, and service. Umar ibn al-Khattab's governance is a perfect example. He would walk the streets at night to check on the condition of his people, ensuring that even the weakest were protected and cared for. This sense of responsibility filtered down into the entire Muslim society, creating a level of unity and trust between rulers and the ruled that the Byzantine and Persian empires had long lost. The leadership of these figures also inspired an incredible sense of discipline and morale in the Muslim armies. Soldiers knew that their leaders were not sitting comfortably in palaces far from the battlefield. They were among them, leading by example, ready to face the same dangers. This built an unmatched bond of loyalty and brotherhood. Unlike the rulers of the superpowers who lived in luxury while their soldiers suffered, Muslim leaders showed by their actions that every life under their care mattered. Such leadership is rare in any age, and it turned the early Muslim community into a movement that could not be stopped by swords, politics, or even numbers. They led not just with commands, but with character. And it was this character that turned ordinary men into history makers. The internal weaknesses of the Byzantine and Persian empires played a major role in their defeat at the hands of the early Muslims. While both of these superpowers looked strong from the outside, inside they were rotting from corruption, injustice, and discontent among their own people. The Byzantine Empire was drowning in heavy taxation, religious oppression, and political instability. Different Christian sects were often persecuted by the ruling elite for holding different theological beliefs. This religious intolerance caused deep resentment among large parts of the population. When Muslim armies arrived, many oppressed communities saw them not as invaders, but as liberators, who offered them freedom of belief and fair treatment. The Persian Empire was facing similar problems. The once great Sassanid dynasty had grown arrogant and detached from the struggles of ordinary people. Royal families and elites lived in extreme luxury while the common population suffered under unbearable taxes and social injustice. Rebellions had already been brewing inside Persia, and the Muslim arrival simply accelerated the collapse that was already underway. Instead of standing united against the external threat, the Persian ruling class was busy fighting internal battles for power and survival. Corruption had spread through the army and government, and the trust between rulers and subjects had completely eroded. In both empires, the will to fight had been weakened long before the Muslim armies crossed their borders. The soldiers were fighting to protect corrupt rulers, not for a cause they believed in. Many civilians preferred a new rule that promised fairness and dignity over the broken promises of their own kings and emperors. The Muslims, with their simple message of justice, mercy, and equality, offered an appealing alternative to centuries of oppression. This explains why, in many cases, cities surrendered peacefully to Muslim rule or even opened their gates willingly. The superpowers of the time failed not because they lacked weapons or wealth, but because they lost the hearts of their people. They had forgotten that true strength comes not from gold or armies, but from justice and integrity. Once that was gone, no wall was high enough, no army large enough, and no strategy smart enough to save them. Muslims did not just defeat armies, they stepped into a world desperately longing for a new beginning and offered exactly what the world needed at that time. Through the principles of Islam, the revolutionary principles of justice and equality introduced by Islam were a major reason why entire populations shifted their loyalty away from the Byzantine and Persian empires. Unlike the existing systems that protected only the rich, the powerful, and the elite, Islam came with a bold message that every human being was equal before the Creator. It did not matter whether someone was rich or poor, Arab or non-Arab, born into nobility or raised in hardship. Justice was to be served to all without favoritism. This was something that many people living under the rule of the superpowers had never truly experienced before. They had grown used to a system where power was inherited by a few families and corruption determined who received protection or favor. Islam challenged that at its core, and it offered dignity to the oppressed and accountability for the rulers. When Muslim armies entered new territories, they did not come with a mission to plunder or enslave. They came with treaties, offering protection to civilians, religious freedom to worshipers, and fair treatment to all communities. Christians, Jews, and others who had suffered under the heavy hand of Byzantine religious persecution found a new breath of freedom under Muslim governance. In Persia, communities that had been burdened by unbearable taxes saw a just system where taxation was reasonable and public welfare mattered. Islamic governance, even at its earliest stages, emphasized building roads, maintaining security, feeding the hungry, and protecting the vulnerable. This clear and consistent focus on justice made the Muslim rulers not just conquerors but liberators in the eyes of many. It was not simply about defeating armies on the battlefield. It was about winning hearts and changing the way people viewed authority itself. They no longer saw rulers as distant and uncaring figures sitting behind palace walls, but as servants of the people who feared accountability before God. The leadership would listen to the grievances of even the poorest among them and correct wrongs without hesitation. This new social order, grounded in the principles taught by Prophet Muhammad PBUH, resonated deeply across cultures and languages. It was not forced upon people by the sword. It was embraced because of the natural human longing for fairness, dignity, and purpose. The rapid expansion of Islam was fueled not merely by military success, but by the undeniable attraction of a system built on truth and equality, offering hope to a world exhausted by centuries of injustice and inequality. The spirit of sacrifice among the early Muslims was one of the most powerful forces behind their victories over the world's superpowers. These were not armies made up of mercenaries looking for gold or fame. They were men and women who had dedicated their lives to a cause far greater than personal gain. Their willingness to sacrifice everything, including their wealth, their comfort, and even their lives, set them apart from any force the world had seen before. They understood that true success comes only when one is willing to lose everything in pursuit of the truth, and they lived by that principle with every breath they took. When facing the mighty empires of Persia and Byzantium, they did not tremble in fear because they knew they were fighting for justice, for humanity, for the freedom to worship and live without oppression. The sacrifices they made were not just physical. They gave up their homes, their families, their businesses, and their lands to answer the call of a higher purpose. Many of the early Muslims left the wealthy cities of Mecca and Medina behind to march into unfamiliar lands filled with hardship and danger. Yet they did so with a heart full of certainty that their sacrifices were not in vain. They saw hardship as a test of their faith, and loss as a path to something far greater. Their goal was not conquest for the sake of conquest, but the spreading of mercy and truth to a world that desperately needed it. This spirit of sacrifice created a level of unity that the larger armies of the superpowers could not match. The soldiers of Byzantium and Persia often fought because they were forced to, because it was their job. But the Muslims fought because they believed in something eternal, and no amount of fear or pain could break that belief. This made them resilient beyond imagination. When one brother fell, another rose to take his place, not out of obligation, but out of love and commitment to the mission they all shared. The early Muslims saw this world as temporary, and every hardship as an opportunity to prove their sincerity. Their sacrifices were not losses. They were investments into a future of justice, mercy, and truth for all people. This mindset made them powerful beyond numbers and strategy, and it was a major reason why Islam spread so rapidly across lands that had once seemed impossible to reach. Thank you for watching and joining us on this fascinating journey through history. The rise of Islam and its victory over the superpowers of its time serves as a powerful reminder that true strength lies in faith, justice, and unity. The early Muslims demonstrated resilience, courage, and unwavering conviction, showing us that, no matter how powerful the opposition, truth and righteousness always prevail. Hope this video has inspired you to reflect on the values that shaped history and encourage you to live with purpose. Stay tuned for more insights and remember to like, share, and subscribe for future content.